Hey everyone, welcome to Yellowfan. I hope you are all doing well. Today I want to argue that the decline of The Simpsons is not just the story of a television show getting worse. It is the story of an entire generation losing something that shaped how they think, how they laugh, and how they understand the world. The Simpsons did not just entertain us, it raised us. It gave us a shared language, a second family, and a place called Springfield that felt more like home than some of the places we actually lived. And when the show lost its soul, when the writers left and the characters changed and the heart disappeared, we did not just lose a cartoon. We lost a piece of ourselves. That is what this video is really about. Not just what went wrong with The Simpsons, but what was taken from the people who loved it most. But before we begin, I would just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It is completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we have managed to build. Anyway, that is enough. Let us begin. The show that raised us. There is a very specific feeling that people over the age of 25 know. You are sitting on the couch, the lights in the living room are dimmed or maybe just off, the TV is glowing, the saxophone starts playing, and then those clouds part, and the camera zooms through them and you see the title, The Simpsons. And for the next 30 minutes, nothing else matters. Not school tomorrow, not the argument your parents had earlier, not the homework you forgot about. For 30 minutes, you and your family are laughing at the same thing at the same time in the same room. That feeling is what this video is really about. Because when people say they miss The Simpsons, they are not just talking about a cartoon. They are talking about that couch, that living room, that version of their life. And to understand why the death of The Simpsons' golden age hurts so much, you first need to understand what the show actually was to people. Not what critics said it was, not what media studies professors wrote about it. What it was to a kid sitting on the floor with a bowl of cereal, watching Homer Simpson strangle his son, and somehow finding it hilarious. The Simpsons premiered on December 17th, 1989. It started as a series of short clips on The Tracy Ullman Show before Fox gave it a full season order, and right from the beginning, it did something no animated show had really done before. It was a cartoon for the whole family, but not in the way Disney meant it. It was not wholesome. It was not clean. It was not trying to teach you a lesson about sharing or being kind to your neighbor. It was messy and loud and rude and honest. The dad was overweight and lazy. The mom was tired and underappreciated. The son was a troublemaker. The daughter was too smart for her own good. The baby just sucked on a pacifier and stared into space. They were not the perfect American family. They were the real American family, and that is exactly why people loved them. By the time the show hit its stride in the early 90s, something remarkable happened. The Simpsons became the most watched show on television for its time slot. There were episodes pulling in over 30 million viewers. 30 million. To put that in perspective, most hit shows today are lucky to get 5 or 6 million watching live. But back then, there was no streaming. There was no YouTube. There was no scrolling through your phone while something played in the background. If The Simpsons was on at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, you sat down and you watched it. And so did everyone else. This is the part that younger audiences might not fully understand. The Simpsons was not just popular, it was unavoidable. Bart Simpson's face was on t-shirts, lunchboxes, posters, cereal boxes, and even underwear. Eat my shorts was something you heard in every school hallway in America. There was a time when Bart Simpson was considered a bad influence on children, and parents and school boards actually tried to ban Simpsons merchandise. President George H.W. Bush said in a speech in 1992 that American families needed to be a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons. A sitting president mentioned a cartoon family by name. That is how deeply embedded this show was in the culture. But here is what made it different from other shows that were big for a while and then disappeared. The Simpsons was not just a fad. It was not a moment. It lasted. And the reason it lasted is because underneath all the jokes and the slapstick and Homer falling down things and Bart writing on the chalkboard, the show had something real going on. It had heart. It had characters that felt like people you actually knew. Think about the way the show handled the relationship between Homer and Marge. In plenty of episodes, you saw them fight. You saw Marge get frustrated. You saw Homer mess up in ways that would end most marriages. But then there would be a moment, usually near the end of the episode, where Homer would do something small but genuine to show that he loved her, and it would land. It would actually hit you emotionally. A cartoon about a yellow man with 4 fingers would make you feel something real about love and marriage, and trying your best even when your best is not very good. Or think about Homer and Lisa. They are completely different people. Homer is loud, simple, impulsive. Lisa is quiet, thoughtful, deeply moral. And the show understood that this kind of gap between a parent and a child is one of the most common and painful dynamics in real families. There were episodes where Lisa felt like her father did not understand her. And instead of turning it into a simple lesson where Homer suddenly becomes the perfect dad, the show let that tension sit. It let it be uncomfortable. And then it would find a small, honest moment of connection between them that felt earned. Not forced, not fake, earned. This is what people do not talk about enough when they discuss the Golden Age. Yes, the jokes were brilliant. Yes, the writing was sharp. But the reason people are still emotional about this show 30 years later is because it made them feel seen. If you grew up in a family that was not perfect, which is every family, The Simpsons told you that was okay. Your dad does not have to be a genius. Your mom does not have to be happy all the time. Your brother can be annoying and you can still love him. Your sister can be weird and she is still your sister. The show gave people permission to laugh at the mess of family life instead of being ashamed of it. And it did all of this while being genuinely, consistently funny in a way that almost no show has been before or since. The jokes operated on multiple levels. A kid watching could laugh at Homer getting hit in the head with a bowling ball. A teenager could laugh at Bart's attitude and rebellion. An adult could catch the political satire, the film references, the subtle wordplay happening in the background. The same episode could be funny to a 10-year-old and a 40-year-old for completely different reasons. That is incredibly hard to do. And for about 6 or 7 seasons, The Simpsons did it almost every single week. This is also why the show became a shared language for an entire generation. If you grew up in the 90s, you did not just watch The Simpsons, you spoke Simpsons. You quoted it in conversation. You used Homer's "don't" when you made a mistake. You said "excellent" like Mr. Burns when something went your way. You called things cromulent even though that is not a real word because the show invented it and everyone knew what it meant. The Simpsons gave people a vocabulary. It gave friend groups and families an inside joke that millions of other people were also in on. And that created a bond. A cultural bond that went way beyond just liking the same show. There was also something about the ritual of it. Every week, at the same time, you watched the new episode. And the next day at school or at work, you talked about it. What was the couch gag? What did Bart write on the chalkboard? Did you catch that joke about the mayor? It was appointment television in the truest sense. You had an appointment with this show, and you kept it. Week after week, season after season, year after year. It became part of the rhythm of your life. For a lot of people, The Simpsons was also the first piece of media that made them think critically about the world. The show tackled religion, politics, corporate greed, the education system, the media, and the justice system. But it did it through comedy. It did not lecture you. It made you laugh, and while you were laughing, it slipped an idea into your head. An idea about how power works, or how advertising manipulates you, or how small towns can be beautiful and broken at the same time. For a generation of kids who were not old enough to watch the news or read the paper, The Simpsons was a window into the adult world, and it made that world feel less scary because it was being shown to you by characters you loved. This is the foundation of everything we are going to talk about in this video. The reason the decline of The Simpsons hurt so much is because the show was never just a show. It was a companion. It was a teacher. It was a family tradition. It was background noise on sick days home from school. It was the thing you quoted with your best friend. It was the first time you realized a cartoon could make you cry. When something means that much to that many people, its decline is not just disappointing, it is personal. It feels like losing a friend who is technically still alive, but is just not the same person anymore. And that is the tragedy we are going to walk through together. Not just what went wrong with The Simpsons, but what was lost. What was taken from an audience that gave this show their time, their loyalty, and their love for years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But to understand what was lost, we first need to understand exactly what made those Golden Age seasons so special, and why the writing between seasons 3 and 8 hit a level that the show has never been able to reach again. Section 2. Why seasons 3 to 8 felt like magic. To understand why The Simpsons fell apart, you need to understand why it was so good in the first place. And not just good in the way people say a show is good because they enjoyed it. Good in a way that television had never really seen before, and honestly has not seen since. Seasons 3 through 8 of The Simpsons represent something that was not supposed to happen. A cartoon on a network that nobody took seriously became the smartest, funniest, most emotionally rich show on all of television. And it did it week after week for roughly 6 years straight. The secret was the writers. And this is the part that most people who casually watch the show never thought about. When you are a kid sitting on the couch laughing at Homer, you do not think about who wrote the joke. You do not think about the room full of people who spent hours figuring out the exact right word to put in Marge's mouth, or the perfect visual gag to put in the background of a scene. But that room is where the magic actually happened. And during the Golden Age, that room was filled with some of the most talented comedy writers who have ever lived. We are talking about people like Conan O'Brien, who went on to become one of the most famous talk show hosts in the world. He was a writer on The Simpsons during seasons 3 and 4. The man who would later interview presidents and movie stars was sitting in a room pitching jokes about Homer buying a snowplow, and he was not even the most important person in that room. John Swartzwelder wrote more episodes of The Simpsons than anyone else in the history of the show. He is credited with writing over 60 episodes, and many of them are considered among the greatest ever made. He wrote Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. He wrote Homer at the Bat. He wrote Homer's Enemy. The man was a machine. And the other writers on the show have said repeatedly in interviews that Swartzwelder's first drafts were so funny that they were almost ready to shoot as they were. Most scripts go through heavy rewrites in a comedy writer's room. Swartzwelder's scripts needed the least work because they came in already brilliant. Then there was George Meyer, who many people inside the industry consider one of the greatest comedy writers of all time, even though most regular viewers have never heard his name. Meyer did not write as many full episodes as Swartzwelder, but his influence on the show was enormous. He was known for being the funniest person in the rewrite room. The Simpsons had a process where scripts would be rewritten by the whole writing staff together, and Meyer was the person who could take a joke that was good and turn it into a joke that was perfect. His fingerprints are on almost every classic episode, even if his name is not always in the credits. You also had Al Jean and Mike Reiss, who served as showrunners during seasons 3 and 4. Their era gave us episodes like A Streetcar Named Marge and Homer the Heretic. They set the tone for what the Golden Age would become. After them, David Merkin took over for seasons 5 and 6, and he pushed the show in a slightly more absurd direction while keeping the emotional core intact. His era gave us Deep Space Homer and Fear of Flying. Then Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein ran seasons 7 and 8, which many fans consider the absolute peak. They gave us Who Shot Mr. Burns, Homer's Enemy, You Only Move Twice, and Homer versus the 18th Amendment. What made all of these different showrunners work during the Golden Age was that they all understood the same basic truth about the show. The Simpsons worked because you cared about the characters. The comedy came from the characters being who they were. Homer was funny because he was Homer, not because random funny things happened to him. The jokes grew out of the personalities, the relationships, the situations that felt real even when they were exaggerated. This is what people mean when they talk about character-driven comedy. You did not need Homer to go to space or travel to another country to be funny. He could just be sitting at the dinner table saying something dumb to Marge, and it would be the funniest thing you saw all week, because the writers understood who Homer was at his core. They understood who Marge was. They understood the dynamic between every single character in that family and in that town. And when you understand your characters that deeply, the comedy writes itself. You just put them in a situation and let them react the way they naturally would. And it is funny because it is true. Take an episode like Last Exit to Springfield from season 4. It is regularly cited as the greatest Simpsons episode ever made. The plot is about the workers at the nuclear power plant going on strike because Mr. Burns wants to take away their dental plan. And the reason the strike matters is because Lisa needs braces. That is it. That is the whole plot. A labor dispute and a kid who needs braces. There is nothing flashy about it. No celebrity guest star carrying the episode, no trip to a foreign country, no massive set piece, just the characters being themselves in a situation that could happen in any small town in America. And it is one of the funniest half hours of television ever produced. The dental plan joke alone is a masterclass. Homer is sitting in the union meeting and he keeps getting distracted. In his head, he hears Lenny say, "dental plan," and then Marge's voice saying, "Lisa needs braces," and it just loops. Dental plan. Lisa needs braces. Dental plan. Lisa needs braces. Over and over until a fly lands in the crack of his behind and finally snaps him into paying attention, and he realizes he needs to fight for the dental plan. It is stupid, it is absurd, and it is genius. Because that is exactly how Homer's brain would work. The joke is not random. It comes from who the character is. Or look at Marge versus the monorail from the same season. Written by Conan O'Brien. The town gets a bunch of money, and a slick con man convinces them to build a monorail instead of doing something practical with it. The episode is a parody of The Music Man, a classic musical, but you did not need to know that to enjoy it. On the surface, it is just a hilarious story about a town full of gullible people being tricked by a smooth talker. On a deeper level, it is about how communities get swept up in big, flashy projects and ignore the boring but important things they actually need. It works on every level because the writing respected the audience enough to layer meaning into the comedy without ever making it feel like homework. And that is another thing the Golden Age did that set it apart. It trusted the audience. The show would make references to classic films, to political events, to literature, to music, and it would never stop and explain them. If you got the reference, great. If you did not, there was still a surface-level joke that worked on its own. This meant that you could watch the same episode 5 times and catch something new every single time. A background sign you missed. A quick visual gag in the corner of the screen. A throwaway line from a side character that was actually a reference to something much bigger. The replay value of Golden Age Simpsons is almost unmatched in television history. People are still finding jokes in these episodes 30 years later. But here's what really made the Golden Age feel like magic and not just good television. It was the balance between comedy and emotion. The show could make you laugh so hard you could not breathe. And then 5 minutes later, it would hit you with a moment so honest and so tender that it caught you completely off guard. Think about Lisa's substitute from season 2, which is right at the beginning of the Golden Age. Lisa gets a substitute teacher named Mr. Bergstrom, played by Dustin Hoffman under a fake name in the credits. For the first time, Lisa feels like an adult actually understands her. He sees how smart she is. He takes her seriously. He treats her like a person, not just a kid. And then he leaves. Because substitute teachers leave. That is what they do. And Lisa is devastated. She runs to the train station to say goodbye, and he gives her a folded note that says, "You are Lisa Simpson." That is all it says. And it is enough. Because the whole point is that being herself is enough. That scene has made grown adults cry. A cartoon about a yellow 8-year-old girl getting a note from her teacher has genuinely moved people to tears decades after it aired. And the same episode has a subplot where Bart runs for class president against Martin Prince and loses because none of his supporters actually voted. It is hilarious. Homer comes home and tries to comfort Bart by saying he has not won anything either, and they end up laughing together. The episode goes from making you cry with Lisa to making you laugh with Bart and Homer in the span of 5 minutes. And neither moment feels forced, neither moment feels like it is trying too hard. It all just flows naturally because the writers understood these characters so deeply that they could move between comedy and drama without it ever feeling like a different show. That is the magic. That is what seasons 3 through 8 had. It was not one thing. It was not just the jokes. It was not just the heart. It was not just the cultural commentary. It was all of it working together at the same time, every single week, for years. The writing staff was operating at a level that they themselves would probably never reach again, and they knew it. Many of the writers from this era have said in interviews that they knew something special was happening while it was happening. They just could not make it last forever. Because the thing about a golden age is that it requires a very specific set of circumstances to exist. The right people have to be in the right place at the right time with the right amount of creative freedom. And the moment any one of those things changes, the magic starts to slip away. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that is exactly what happened, because one by one, the writers who built this golden age started to leave. And when they did, they took something with them that the show has never been able to get back. Section 3. Homer was a real person once. If you ask someone what went wrong with The Simpsons, most people will not start by talking about the writing staff, or the network, or the ratings. They will start by talking about Homer. Because Homer Simpson is the center of the show. He always was. And the change in who Homer is as a character is the single clearest way to see the difference between the Golden Age and everything that came after. During seasons 3 through 8, Homer Simpson was not just a funny cartoon character. He was a person. A deeply flawed, often selfish, frequently stupid person, but a person. He had a heart. He had limits. He had moments where he looked at his family and you could see in his eyes that he knew he was not good enough for them, but he was trying. And that trying is what made him one of the most beloved characters in the history of television. Not because he was a hero, not because he was smart or brave or strong, because he was trying. And most people watching at home knew exactly what that felt like. The Golden Age understood something very important about Homer. His stupidity was not the joke. His stupidity was the setup. The joke was what happened when a man with limited intelligence and unlimited love for his family tried to navigate a world that was too complicated for him. That is a completely different thing. When stupidity is the joke, you are just laughing at someone for being dumb. When stupidity is the setup, you are laughing at the situation that his limitations create. And more importantly, you are rooting for him. You want him to figure it out. You want him to come through for Marge or Lisa or Bart. And when he does, even in some small, clumsy way, it means something. Let me give you a specific example. A Streetcar Named Marge from season 4. Marge decides to audition for a community theater production of a musical version of A Streetcar Named Desire. Homer does not care at all. He does not listen when she talks about it. He does not support her. He does not even pretend to be interested. He just sits on the couch watching TV and grunting while Marge tries to share something that matters to her. And Marge channels all of her frustration with Homer into her performance as Blanche Dubois. She is so good because she is drawing from real pain, the pain of being married to a man who takes her for granted. And then Homer goes to the show. He watches Marge perform, and for the first time, he sees what she has been trying to tell him. He sees it in her performance. He sees the loneliness. He sees the frustration. He sees how she feels ignored and unappreciated. And after the show, he does not give some big speech. He does not suddenly become a different person. He just tells her it was really good. And the way he says it, you can tell he finally gets it. Just a little bit. Just enough. And Marge knows that too. It is a tiny moment, but it is real, and it is earned. Because the whole episode built to that one small shift in understanding between a husband and wife who love each other, but do not always know how to show it. That is who Homer was in the Golden Age, a man who messed up constantly, but was capable of growth in small, believable ways. Not permanent growth, not some dramatic transformation. He would go right back to being selfish and lazy in the next episode. But in the moment, when it really counted, he could rise just enough to remind you why Marge married him in the first place. And nowhere is this more clear than in And Maggie Makes 3 from season 6. This is the episode where the family is looking through a photo album and they notice there are no photos of Maggie anywhere in the house. Homer explains why through a flashback. He tells the story of how he had finally achieved his dream. He had quit his job at the nuclear power plant and gotten a job at a bowling alley. He was happy. For the first time in his adult life, Homer Simpson was genuinely happy. He had enough money to support his family. He had a job he loved. Everything was perfect. And then Marge got pregnant with Maggie. The math did not work anymore. A bowling alley salary could not support 3 kids. So Homer had to go back to the power plant. He had to go back to the job he hated. He had to walk into Mr. Burns' office and beg for his old position back. And Burns, being Burns, put a plaque on the wall above Homer's workstation that read, "Don't forget, you're here forever." It was meant to crush him. It was meant to remind Homer every single day that he was trapped. But then the episode shows you Homer's workstation, and you see that he has placed photos of Maggie all over the plaque. He has covered up certain letters so that the sign now reads, "Do it for her." And that is the end of the episode. No big speech, no dramatic music trying to force you to feel something. Just a man who gave up his dream for his daughter and found a way to make peace with it by reminding himself why he did it. Every single day he looks at that sign and he remembers. He does it for her. That scene has been called one of the greatest moments in television history, not just in animation, in all of television. And it works because of everything the show built before that moment. You know Homer hates his job. You have seen him suffer at the plant for years. You know what it meant for him to finally escape. So when he goes back, you feel the weight of it. And when you see those photos of Maggie covering that sign, it hits you in a way that no amount of clever dialogue or flashy animation could ever achieve. It is pure character. Pure emotion, pure truth. This is the Homer that people fell in love with. The Homer who worked a job he hated because his family needed him to. The Homer who sat with Lisa on the roof and watched the stars because she was sad, even though he had no idea what she was talking about when she pointed out the constellations. The Homer who ran back into a burning house to save his possessions, and then ran back in again to save his family, and you believed both impulses completely because that is exactly who he was. Selfish first, then brave when it mattered. In Lisa's substitute, Lisa is heartbroken because her favorite teacher is leaving. She comes home crying and goes to her room. Homer follows her, and he does not know what to say. He is not equipped for this. He is not a man who knows how to handle a gifted daughter's emotional pain. But he tries. He sits with her. He stumbles through some words, and somehow, just by being there and being honest about the fact that he does not have the answers, he makes it better. Lisa hugs him, and you believe it. You believe that this dumb, clumsy, well-meaning man just healed his daughter a little bit. Not because he said the right thing, but because he showed up. Homer's relationship with Bart in the Golden Age was different but equally real. Homer and Bart had a rougher dynamic. Homer would strangle Bart. He would yell at him. He would call him boy in a way that was sometimes affectionate and sometimes genuinely irritated. But underneath all of that, there was a connection. Bart was the most like Homer of all the kids. He was impulsive, reckless, not interested in school, drawn to trouble. And Homer saw himself in Bart whether he admitted it or not. There were moments, small ones, where you could see Homer looking at Bart with something that was not anger or frustration, but recognition. He knew this kid. He was this kid. In Bart Gets an F from Season 2, Bart is about to fail the 4th grade. He tries to study. He genuinely tries, which is something Bart almost never does. And he still fails the test. By 1 point. And Bart starts crying. Not cartoon crying, real crying. The kind where a kid's voice breaks and you can hear the shame in it. He says that he really did try this time. And the moment is devastating because you have watched Bart be the class clown and the troublemaker for so long that when he finally drops the act and shows you how scared he is of failing, it cuts right through you. His teacher, Mrs. Krabappel, sees that he is genuinely upset and gives him the extra point because he demonstrated applied knowledge through his emotional response. But the real impact of the scene is seeing Bart's mask come off. And Homer is not in that scene, but the fact that the show could make you feel that much for Bart, the bratty kid who writes insults on the chalkboard every week, tells you everything about how well these characters were written. Every character in the Simpson family had this depth during the Golden Age. Marge had episodes where you saw the quiet sadness she carried from putting everyone else's needs before her own. Lisa had episodes where being the smartest person in the room was shown not as a superpower, but as a source of loneliness. Even Maggie, who never spoke, had entire storylines built around the idea that she understood far more than anyone gave her credit for. The family was not a collection of traits. They were people, and Homer was at the center of all of it, holding the family together in his own messy, imperfect way. That is the version of Homer Simpson that an entire generation grew up with. That is the Homer people loved. Not a cartoon character, a father. A husband. A man who is bad at almost everything, but somehow good at the one thing that mattered most, which was loving his family, even when he had no idea how to show it. And that is what makes it so painful to watch what happened to him. Because at some point, the show forgot who Homer was. They kept his face, they kept his voice, they kept his name. But they hollowed him out and replaced the person inside with something louder, meaner, and emptier. And the man who once covered a sign with photos of his baby daughter became a character who would hurt people for a laugh and never think twice about it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Homer's transformation did not happen on its own. It happened because the people who understood him, the writers who built him into the character that millions of people loved, started walking out the door one by one. And that exodus is where the real story of the decline begins. Section 4. The characters you grew up with had souls. Homer gets most of the attention when people talk about what made The Simpsons special. And that makes sense. He is the loudest character on the show. He is the one people quote the most. He is the face on the merchandise. But if Homer was the only good character on The Simpsons, the show would have run out of gas after 2 seasons. The reason the Golden Age worked as well as it did is because every single character in Springfield felt like a real person. Not just the family, everyone. The neighbors, the teachers, the bartender, the shop owner, the mayor, the bully, the nerd. Every person in that town had a story, a personality, and something going on beneath the surface that made you care about them even when they only had a few lines in an episode. Let us start with Marge, because Marge Simpson is one of the most underappreciated characters in television history. During the Golden Age, Marge was not just the responsible one. She was not just the wife who cleaned up after Homer. She was a woman with dreams and frustrations and a deep well of sadness that the show explored in ways that were genuinely moving. In Scenes from the Class Struggle in Springfield, from Season 7, Marge finds a Chanel suit at a discount store, and suddenly she has a way into the upper-class social world she has never been part of. She gets invited to the Springfield Country Club. She starts spending time with wealthy women. And you watch Marge slowly lose herself. She keeps altering the suit to make it look different for each event. She starts changing how she talks. She starts pulling away from her family because she is embarrassed by them. And the episode does not play this as a joke. It plays it as something painful and real. Marge is a woman who has spent her entire adult life sacrificing for her family. And when she finally gets a taste of something that is just for her, she does not know how to handle it. She wants to belong somewhere. She wants to be seen as more than just a housewife with tall blue hair married to the town idiot. By the end of the episode, Marge chooses her family over the country club. But the show does not pretend that the choice was easy. You can see it on her face. She gave something up. And the next week, she is right back in that kitchen, right back in that routine, and nobody in her family fully understands what she went through. That is Marge in the Golden Age. A woman who loves her family but quietly mourns the life she might have had. And the show let you see that mourning without ever turning her into a victim or a punchline. Then there is Bart. People think of Bart as the troublemaker, the rebel, the kid who talks back to authority and gets away with it. And he is all of those things. But during the Golden Age, the show never let you forget that underneath the attitude, Bart was just a 10-year-old kid. He was not cool, he was not tough. He was scared and insecure and desperate for approval, and his rebellion was a mask he wore because he did not know what else to do. Bart Gets an F from Season 2 is the clearest example. Bart is failing school, not because he does not care, but because he genuinely cannot keep up. He makes a deal with God during a snow day, promising to study if school gets canceled, and he does study. For the first time in his life, Bart Simpson actually sits down and tries to learn the material. He reads the books, he stays up late, he puts in the effort, and he still fails. He gets 1 point below passing, and when he sees that score, he breaks. He starts crying right there in the classroom, and through his tears he says something about how he really did try this time. And in that moment you realize that Bart has been carrying the weight of being the kid everyone expects to fail. Every adult in his life has written him off. His teacher, his principal, sometimes even his own father. And the one time he actually tries to prove them all wrong, it is not enough. Misses. Krabappel ends up giving him the extra point because in his emotional outburst, he accidentally demonstrates real knowledge of the subject. But that almost does not matter. What matters is that the show pulled back the curtain on Bart Simpson and showed you the kid behind the act. And once you saw that kid, you could never look at Bart the same way again. Every time he acted out after that, part of you understood why. Lisa might be the character the Golden Age handled with the most care. Because Lisa Simpson is difficult to write well, she is the smartest person in her family by a huge margin. She is morally conscious. She cares about the environment, about justice, about art and music and literature. In the wrong hands, Lisa becomes preachy. She becomes a character who lectures the audience. She becomes annoying. And in the later seasons of the show, that is exactly what happened. But during the Golden Age, Lisa was not a mouthpiece for whatever issue the writers wanted to address that week. She was a lonely 8-year-old girl who happened to be brilliant and had no idea what to do with it. Summer of 4 feet 2 inches from season 7 is maybe the best Lisa episode ever made. The family goes on vacation, and Lisa decides to reinvent herself. She leaves behind her books and her overalls and tries to be a normal, cool kid. She makes friends, real friends, kids who like her because she is fun and easygoing, not because she is smart. And for a few days, Lisa is happy in a way she almost never is at home. She fits in. She belongs. And then Bart, jealous of Lisa's new friends, shows them her yearbook. The yearbook where nobody signed their name. The yearbook that proves that back in Springfield, Lisa is the weird kid nobody likes. He does it to embarrass her, and it works. Lisa is devastated. Her new friends see who she really is, or at least who she is at school, and she assumes it is over. But then something beautiful happens. The friends come to the car before the family leaves, and they have decorated it with seashells and written messages to Lisa all over it. They liked her. The real her. Not the cool version she was pretending to be. And Lisa cries, but this time from happiness. That episode understood something profound about being a kid. The fear that if people see the real you, they will not like what they find. Lisa carries that fear with her every day. She hides behind her intelligence because it is the one thing she has that nobody can take away from her. But it is also the thing that isolates her. And the show explored that tension with more honesty and empathy than most live-action dramas manage with adult characters. Now let us talk about the side characters, because this is where the Golden Age really separated itself from everything else on television. Springfield was not just a backdrop. It was a living, breathing town full of people who had their own lives happening, whether the Simpson family was involved or not. Mo Sizlak is a perfect example. On the surface, Mo is a joke. He is the ugly bartender who cannot get a date. He falls for prank calls. He is grumpy and rude. But during the Golden Age, the show would occasionally let you see the loneliness underneath. There were moments where Mo's desperation for human connection was not funny at all. It was heartbreaking. He was a man who had been alone for so long that he did not know how to be any other way. And the show never gave him a happy ending, because real life does not always give people happy endings. It just let him be sad sometimes, and then moved on. And that restraint, that willingness to let a side character carry real emotional weight without resolving it neatly, is what made Springfield feel like a real place. Barney Gumble is another one. Barney was Homer's best friend and the town drunk. And for most of the show, he was played for laughs. The burping, the stumbling, the passing out in random places. But in Days of Wine and Dozes from season 11, which is slightly outside the traditional Golden Age, but was written with that same spirit, Barney gets sober. And you see what he was like before the drinking took over. He was smart. He was talented. He had potential. And the episode does not shy away from the ugliness of addiction. It shows you what alcohol took from Barney. It shows you the person he could have been. And even though the show eventually reverted Barney back to being a drunk, because that is how sitcoms work, the fact that they took the time to show you who he really was underneath the jokes says everything about how the Golden Age treated its characters. Even smaller characters got this treatment. Milhouse Van Houten was not just Bart's nerdy friend, he was a kid with divorced parents who was trying to hold it together while his whole home life fell apart. Principal Skinner was not just a boring authority figure. He was a man haunted by his time in Vietnam who found order and purpose in running a school. Groundskeeper Willie was not just an angry Scotsman. He was a proud man trapped in a job that was beneath him, raging at a world that would never see his value. Nelson Muntz was not just a bully. He was a kid with an absent father and a neglectful mother who hurt other people because he was hurting inside. The Golden Age gave every character in Springfield a reason for being who they were. Nobody was just a punchline. Nobody existed only to set up a joke for someone else. They were all people. Flawed, funny, sad, complicated people who lived in the same town and interacted with each other in ways that felt natural and real. When you watched the show during those years, you did not just know the characters, you understood them, you felt for them, you remembered them. And that is what made Springfield feel like home. Not the geography, not the landmarks, not the opening credits. It was the people. The writers had created an entire town full of human beings, and spending time in that town every week felt like visiting a place where you knew everyone and everyone knew you. It was warm. It was familiar. It was yours. That warmth, that depth, that attention to every single person on screen, no matter how small their role, that is what the Golden Age had that the later seasons lost completely. When the characters stopped feeling like people and started feeling like props for whatever random plot the writers needed that week, Springfield stopped being a town and became a set. And a set is not a place you miss. A set is not a place you go back to for comfort 20 years later. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the characters did not lose their souls on their own. Something had to change behind the scenes for that to happen, and the biggest change was the one that fans felt first, even if they could not name it at the time. The jokes stopped landing the way they used to. The humor that once felt like it was part of your brain, the lines you quoted without thinking, started to disappear, and in its place came something that looked like Simpsons comedy, but did not feel like it at all. Section 5. The jokes that became part of your brain. There is a test you can do right now to prove how deeply The Simpsons embedded itself into your mind. Think about the last time you made a mistake, a real one. You dropped something or forgot something or walked into the wrong room. There is a very good chance that somewhere in your head, even if you did not say it out loud, you heard the word "no." You did not decide to think that. You did not choose it. It just happened because The Simpsons put it there. Decades ago, a cartoon character's catchphrase got lodged into your brain so deeply that it became part of how you react to the world. And dough is just the beginning. Golden Age Simpsons did not just make people laugh, it gave an entire generation a second language, a shared vocabulary that millions of people understood and used without ever having to explain it to each other. If you grew up watching this show, you did not just enjoy the jokes, you absorbed them. They became part of how you talked, how you thought, and how you connected with other people. And the reason the humor from this era stuck so permanently, while almost nothing from the later seasons has entered the cultural vocabulary in the same way, comes down to how the jokes were built. The comedy in the Golden Age operated on layers. Every joke had a surface and something underneath it, sometimes 2 or 3 things underneath it. A kid watching could laugh at the obvious gag. A teenager could catch the sarcasm. An adult could pick up the reference to a film, or a political event, or a piece of history that the writers had woven into the background. This meant that the same joke could be funny to completely different people for completely different reasons. And it meant that when you re-watched an episode years later, you would catch things you missed the first time. The jokes kept giving. They were not disposable. They were built to last. Take the steamed ham scene from 22 short films about Springfield in Season 7. Principal Skinner invites Superintendent Chalmers over for lunch. He burns the roast. So he sneaks out to buy fast food from Krusty Burger and tries to pass it off as his own cooking. Chalmers questions him at every step. Why is there smoke coming from the oven? Why do the hamburgers look exactly like the ones from Krusty Burger? And Skinner just keeps lying. Each lie is more desperate and more ridiculous than the last. He calls the hamburgers steamed hams and claims it is a regional dialect from upstate New York. When Chalmers says he is from Utica and has never heard the phrase, Skinner, without missing a beat, says it is more of an Albany expression. On the surface, it is a simple scene about a man lying badly. A kid can find that funny. But the scene is also a perfectly constructed escalation of awkwardness. Every line raises the stakes. Every answer Skinner gives digs him deeper into the hole. The comedy comes from the structure, from the rhythm, from the fact that both characters know something is wrong, but they are locked into this social dance where neither one is willing to break the politeness and just say what is happening. That is observational comedy about how people actually behave in uncomfortable situations, wrapped inside a cartoon about hamburgers. And it is so well crafted that decades after it aired, steamed hams became one of the biggest memes on the internet. People made remixes of it, animations of it, musical versions. It took on a life of its own because the original scene was so tight, so perfectly written, that it could survive being pulled apart and reassembled in 1,000 different ways and still be funny. That is the difference between Golden Age Simpsons humor and what came after. The Golden Age jokes had bones, they had structure, they could stand on their own, and they could support other things being built on top of them. Later Simpsons jokes were soft. They were just references or gross-out gags or random things happening to characters. You laughed once, maybe, and then you forgot them. But you never forgot steamed hams. You never forgot dental plan, Lisa needs braces. You never forgot Mr. Burns asking Smithers what that man's name was after Homer had worked for him for years. The show had an incredible ability to make running gags feel fresh every time they appeared. Sideshow Bob stepping on rakes is a perfect example. In Cape Fear from Season 5, there is a sequence where Bob is walking through a field and he keeps stepping on rakes that smack him in the face. The first time it happens, it is funny. The second time, it is still funny. By the fourth or fifth time, it should not be funny anymore. The joke should be dead. But the show keeps going. Bob steps on rake after rake after rake, and each time he makes this low groan of pain and frustration. And it loops past being funny into being not funny, and then loops all the way back around into being the funniest thing you have ever seen. The audience is laughing not at the gag anymore, but at the sheer commitment to the gag, at the absurdity of how long it goes on. The writers understood that there is a point where repetition itself becomes the joke, and they rode that line perfectly. And then there are the quotes, the lines that left the show and entered everyday life. The Simpsons gave the English language new words and phrases that people still use today. Dough was added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 2001. That is not a small thing. A sound that Dan Castellaneta made up to express Homer's frustration became an officially recognized word in the English language. How many TV shows can say that? How many shows have created a word that is now used by people who have never even watched a single episode? Cromulent is another one. It appeared in the episode Lisa the Iconoclast from Season 7. A teacher uses it in a sentence, and another teacher says she never heard the word before. And the first teacher says, "It's a perfectly cromulent word." The joke is that the word does not exist. The writers made it up. But it sounded real enough that people started using it in actual conversation. And eventually, it started showing up in real dictionaries as a word meaning acceptable or fine. A fake word from a cartoon became a real word because the joke was so good that people wanted it to be real. Imbiggen comes from the same episode, same joke, a made-up word that sounded like it should be real. And years later, scientists actually started using imbiggen in research papers to describe things getting larger. A word that was invented as a joke on The Simpsons is now used in actual scientific literature. That is the kind of cultural penetration that no show before or since has achieved. But it was not just the invented words, it was the quotes that became shorthand for entire ideas. When someone says, "I for one welcome our new insect overlords," they are quoting Kent Brockman from Deep Space Homer in Season 5. The actual line was about alien overlords, but it has become a template. Whenever someone in power makes a sudden shift to supporting whoever seems to be winning, people use that format. It has been used in political commentary, in news articles, in everyday conversation. One line from one episode of a cartoon became a permanent tool for expressing a very specific kind of cowardly surrender to power. When someone says, "worst episode ever," in the voice of Comic Book Guy, they are not just quoting a character. They are using a phrase that has become the default way to express extreme disappointment with any piece of entertainment. Comic Book Guy said it once, and now millions of people use it constantly without even thinking about where it came from. Troy McClure's introductions became their own format. "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as..." followed by two absurd fake movie titles. That structure has been copied and parodied endlessly because it is such a perfect joke template. It is funny every single time because the fake titles do all the work. The Erotic Adventures of Hercules and Dial M for Murderousness. You do not need to know anything else about Troy McClure. Those two fake titles tell you everything about who he is and what his career looks like. That is efficient comedy. That is writing so sharp that a throwaway line does more character work than most shows do in an entire episode. Ralph Wiggum's lines became legendary in their own right. "I bent my Wookiee." "Me fail English? That's impossible." "My cat's breath smells like cat food." None of these lines are traditional jokes. There is no setup and punchline. They are just things a very strange, very innocent child would say. And they are hilarious because of how perfectly they capture the way a kid like Ralph would think and talk. The humor is in the character. It always comes back to the character. This is the thread that connects all of the Golden Age humor. Whether it was a complex layered joke with 3 levels of meaning, or a simple one-liner from a side character, the comedy came from who these people were. Homer said, "Doh!" because that is how Homer reacts to things. Ralph said bizarre things because that is how Ralph's brain works. Skinner lied about steamed hams because that is who Skinner is, a man so rigid and so desperate to maintain appearances that he would rather build an insane tower of lies than admit he burned lunch. The jokes were not bolted onto the characters. They grew out of them. And that is why they lasted. When you think about the later seasons, try to name a quote that has entered the cultural vocabulary the same way. Try to think of a scene from season 20 or season 25 that people still reference in daily conversation. Try to name a single joke from the last 15 years of the show that rewired how a generation communicates. It is very hard. Not because the later seasons never had any good jokes. Some of them did. But the jokes did not stick. They did not embed themselves into people's brains the way the Golden Age humor did, because they were not coming from the same place. They were not growing out of characters that felt real. They were just jokes, and just jokes are forgettable. Character-driven humor is forever. The Simpsons' Golden Age did not just entertain people. It furnished their minds. It gave them words and phrases and ways of seeing the world that they still carry with them decades later. And when a show does that, when it becomes part of how you think and how you talk and how you connect with other people, its decline is not just a drop in quality. It is the loss of a living, growing thing that was still adding to your life every week. One week it was adding new words to your vocabulary. The next week it was giving you a new way to describe your boss or your neighbor or your own stupid mistakes. And then one day it just stopped. The show was still on, New episodes were still airing, but nothing was sticking anymore. The factory that built all those perfect little pieces of language that lived in your head forever had shut down, and it was never going to reopen. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The question is why? Why did the humor change so drastically? Why did a show that could create jokes powerful enough to alter the English language suddenly lose the ability to write a single memorable line? And the answer, like most answers when it comes to the decline of The Simpsons, starts with the people who left. The writers who built the Golden Age did not stay forever, and when they walked away, the comedy walked away with them. Section 6. The writers who left and took the soul with them. The Simpsons did not get bad overnight. There was no single moment where someone flipped a switch and the show stopped working. What happened was slower than that, and in some ways more painful. The people who made the show great left. One by one, year by year, the writers who understood these characters better than anyone, who knew exactly how Homer would react to something, or what Marge would say when she was tired, or how Bart would hide his feelings behind a joke, those people moved on to other things. And every time one of them walked out the door, they took a piece of the show's soul with them. The people who replaced them were not bad writers. Some of them were very talented. But they did not have the same connection to the material. They did not build these characters from the ground up. They inherited them. And there is a difference between building something and inheriting it that no amount of talent can fully bridge. Let us trace how it happened, because the timeline matters. When you lay it all out, you can see the decline was not random. It was directly connected to who was in the room and who was not. The first major loss came after season 4. That is when Conan O'Brien left the show. Conan had been a writer and producer on The Simpsons since season 3. He was part of the team during what many people consider the beginning of the Golden Age's peak. He co-wrote some of the most beloved episodes in the show's history, including Marge vs. the Monorail, which is frequently listed among the top 5 Simpsons episodes ever made. He also co-wrote New Kid on the Block and Homer Goes to College. Conan left because he was offered the chance to host Late Night on NBC, replacing David Letterman. It was an incredible opportunity, and nobody could blame him for taking it. But his departure meant the room lost one of its sharpest comedic minds at a time when the show was operating at its absolute best. Around the same time, other key writers from the early Golden Age were also moving on. Jeff Martin, who wrote classic episodes like The Way We Was and worked on the show during seasons 2 through 4, left to pursue other projects. Jay Kogan and Wallace Wolodarski, who had been part of the writing staff since the very beginning and co-wrote episodes like Bart the Genius and Treehouse of Horror, departed after season 4 as well. These were people who had been with the show since it was still figuring out what it wanted to be. They were part of the foundation. And when foundation pieces start to disappear, what is built on top of them becomes less stable, even if you cannot see it right away. Al Jean and Mike Reiss had served as showrunners during seasons 3 and 4. Their leadership helped define the Golden Age tone. That balance between sharp comedy and real emotion that people associate with peak Simpsons was largely established under their watch. After season 4, they stepped back from day-to-day showrunning to work on other projects, though Al Jean would return to the show in a much bigger way later. David Merkin took over as showrunner for seasons 5 and 6. And to his credit, Merkin's era produced some incredible episodes. Deep Space Homer, Cape Fear, Bart Gets Famous, Sweet Seymour Skinner's Bad Ass Suggestion, and many others came from his tenure. Merkin pushed the show towards slightly more absurd humor while still respecting the emotional foundation that the previous writers had built. But after 2 seasons, Merkin left as showrunner as well. Then came Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, who ran seasons 7 and 8. This is the era that many hardcore fans consider the absolute peak of the entire show. Under their leadership, The Simpsons produced Who Shot Mr. Burns, Parts 1 and 2, You Only Move Twice, which introduced Hank Scorpio, Homer's Enemy, which gave us Frank Grimes, Homer versus the 18th Amendment, El viaje misterioso de nuestro Homer, and 22 short films about Springfield, which contained the legendary steamed hams scene. Oakley and Weinstein understood the show at its deepest level. They could do big, ambitious episodes and small, quiet ones. They could do absurd comedy and genuine heartbreak. Their 2 seasons are remarkably consistent in quality in a way that is almost hard to believe when you go back and watch them now. And then they left. After season 8, Oakley and Weinstein moved on. And this is the departure that most fans point to as the turning point. Not because the show became unwatchable overnight, season 9 still had good episodes. Season 10 had a few, but the consistency was gone. The feeling that every single episode was going to deliver something special, that certainty that had defined the Golden Age, disappeared after Oakley and Weinstein walked away. John Swartzwelder continued to write episodes for several more seasons, but his involvement became less central over time. He was always a somewhat mysterious figure. He was known for writing his scripts alone, often at a booth in a coffee shop, and handing them in almost fully formed. Other writers have described his drafts as being so complete and so funny that the rewrite room barely needed to touch them. Swartzwelder wrote his last Simpsons episode in season 15. By then, the Golden Age was long over. But his continued presence in the earlier post-Golden Age seasons is one reason why the show did not collapse all at once. As long as Swartzwelder was still handing in scripts, there was at least one person in the room who still wrote the characters the way they were meant to be written. George Meyer's reduced involvement was another quiet but significant loss. Meyer was never the most visible writer on the show. He did not have the name recognition of Conan O'Brien or the episode count of Swartzwelder. But people inside the industry consistently describe him as one of the most important voices in the room during the Golden Age. He was the writer who could take a good joke and make it great during rewrites. He was the person who understood tone better than almost anyone. When Meyer was fully engaged with the show, the rewrite room had a compass. Someone who could feel when a joke was too mean, or when an emotional moment was not earned, or when a scene was dragging. That kind of instinct cannot be replaced by hiring a new writer, no matter how funny that new writer might be. After Oakley and Weinstein departed, Mike Scully became the showrunner for seasons 9 through 12, and this is where the change became visible to the audience. Scully's era is often described by fans as the transition period, the point where the show went from great to good to okay to something that did not quite feel like The Simpsons anymore. Under Scully, the show started to lean more heavily on outlandish plots. Homer's character began to shift toward what fans would later call jerk-ass Homer, a version of the character who was louder, meaner, more reckless, and less grounded in the emotional reality that had defined him during the Golden Age. This was not necessarily Scully's fault as a person or a writer. He was put in an incredibly difficult position. He inherited a show that was being compared to its own Golden Age every single week. Every episode he oversaw was measured against the best television comedy ever made. That is an impossible standard, and the writer's room he was leading did not have the same people in it. The institutional knowledge was gone. The writers who had spent years learning these characters from the inside out had been replaced by newer writers who were learning on the job. They could write funny jokes. They could put together decent plots, but they did not have the deep understanding of who these characters were that the original staff had built up over years of working together. There is something important to understand about how a writer's room works on a show like The Simpsons. The characters are not just words on a page. Over time, the writers develop an almost instinctive feel for them. They know what Homer would say in a given situation, not because they think about it logically, but because they have spent so many hours writing him that his voice lives in their heads. They can hear him. They know when a line sounds like Homer and when it sounds like a generic funny character. This kind of deep familiarity takes years to build. You cannot just hire someone and expect them to have it on their first day. And when the entire room turns over, when almost everyone who had that instinctive connection to the characters is gone, the characters start to drift. They start saying things they would not say. They start doing things they would not do. They are still called Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa, but something is off. Something does not sound right, and the audience can feel it even if they cannot explain exactly what changed. This is what happened to The Simpsons. It was not a creative decision to make the show worse. Nobody sat in a room and said, "Let us ruin this." It was a natural consequence of the people who created the Golden Age leaving and being replaced by people who did not have the same history with the material. The DNA of the show lived in the writers, not in the scripts. When they left, the DNA left with them, and what remained was the body of the show, the characters, the setting, the format, but without the thing that had made it alive. Al Jean returned as showrunner starting with season 13. He has held that position longer than anyone else in the show's history. And Jean is not an outsider. He was there at the beginning. He was part of the Golden Age. But the room around him was different. The writers were different. The network expectations were different. The culture was different. And one person, no matter how talented, cannot single-handedly recreate the conditions that made the Golden Age possible. You needed that specific combination of people, that specific chemistry, that specific moment in time. And by season 13, that moment had passed. The tragedy of the writers leaving is not that they did anything wrong. They had every right to move on with their careers. Conan O'Brien became a legendary talk show host. Other writers went on to create their own shows, write films, or build careers in other parts of the entertainment industry. They were not obligated to stay on one show forever. But the consequence of their leaving was that The Simpsons lost the thing that made it The Simpsons. It kept the name, it kept the characters, it kept the time slot, but the people who knew how to make it magic were gone. And the show has been running on fumes from their work ever since. What makes this even more painful is that the audience could feel the change happening in real time. They could not always name what was different. They just knew that something was not right. An episode would air, and instead of quoting it the next day, people would just shrug and move on. A joke would land flat, and instead of rewinding to catch what they missed, viewers started to wonder if maybe there was nothing to catch. The show that used to reward your attention was now punishing it. The more closely you watched, the more you noticed what was missing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And for a lot of fans, there was one specific moment, one episode, one scene, where the feeling of something being wrong became impossible to ignore. A moment where they looked at the screen and thought for the first time that this was not the show they fell in love with. And for a surprising number of people, that moment was the same episode. Section 7, the moment you realized something was wrong. Every Simpsons fan has a moment, a specific episode, sometimes a specific scene, where something shifted inside them, where the thing they had trusted for years to make them laugh and feel something suddenly felt off, like hearing a familiar song played in the wrong key. Everything looks the same, the characters are the same, the town is the same, the voices are the same, but something in the core of it has changed, and you cannot quite put your finger on what it is. You just know it does not feel right anymore. For a huge number of fans, that moment was the Principal and the Pauper from season 9. And the reason this episode gets brought up more than any other when people talk about the decline of The Simpsons is not because it was the worst episode the show ever made. It was not. There were episodes in later seasons that were far worse by almost any measure. But The Principal and the Pauper was the first time the show broke its own rules in a way that felt like a betrayal. It was the episode that told the audience, whether the writers intended this or not, that the characters and the world they had invested in for nearly a decade did not matter as much as they thought. The plot of the episode is this. A man arrives in Springfield claiming to be the real Seymour Skinner. It turns out that the principal Skinner everyone has known for the entire run of the show is actually an imposter named Armin Tamzarian. He was a street punk who served in Vietnam alongside the real Skinner. When the real Skinner was presumed dead, Tamzarian took his identity, came to Springfield, and built a life as the principal of Springfield Elementary. He became the man the audience knew, the stiff, rule-following, mother-dominated, quietly sad man who had been a part of the show since the very first season. And then the episode just undoes all of that. It says that the person you have been watching for 8 years is not who you thought he was. His name is not real. His history is not real. His identity is a lie. And by the end of the episode, the real Skinner is run out of town, everything goes back to normal, and Judge Snyder issues a court order that nobody in Springfield is ever allowed to mention the incident again. It is played as a joke, a meta joke about how sitcoms always reset to the status quo. But for a lot of the audience, it did not land as a joke. It landed as something much worse. The reason this episode hurt so many fans is because it violated the trust the show had built. For 8 years, The Simpsons had asked the audience to care about these characters, to invest in their stories, to believe that even though it was a cartoon, and even though things reset every week, these people had real histories and real emotions and real lives that mattered. Skinner's background as a Vietnam veteran was not just a random detail. It had been referenced in multiple episodes. It was part of who he was. His relationship with his mother, his stiffness, his loneliness, his quiet dignity in the face of a job that was slowly killing his spirit, all of that was built on the foundation of who Seymour Skinner was. And the principal and the pauper pulled that foundation out from under the character and said, actually, none of that was real. He is someone else entirely. Surprise! Harry Shearer, the voice actor who plays Skinner along with many other characters on the show, has spoken publicly about his dislike for this episode. He felt it undermined the character in a fundamental way, and many of the original Golden Age writers have expressed similar sentiments over the years. Matt Groening himself, the creator of The Simpsons, has called it one of the episodes he dislikes the most. When the creator of the show and the actor who voices the character both think an episode was a mistake, that tells you something significant about what went wrong. But here's the thing that makes the principal and the pauper so important in the story of the show's decline. It was not just a bad episode. It was a signal. It told the audience that the new writer's room, the post-Golden Age room, had a different relationship with these characters than the original writers did. The original writers treated the characters as real people with histories that mattered. The new room treated them as flexible tools that could be reshaped to fit whatever story they wanted to tell that week. That is a fundamental shift in how a show operates. And once you make that shift, once you tell the audience that character history is disposable, you cannot take it back. The trust is broken. Now, not every fan points to the principal and the pauper as their moment. Some people held on longer. Some fans did not feel the shift until later in Season 9 or into Season 10. The decline was not uniform. It came in waves. There would be a bad episode, followed by a decent one, followed by another bad one. The inconsistency was itself a sign that something had changed. During the Golden Age, you could count on almost every episode being good. During the transition period, it became a coin flip. And the bad episodes were bad in a new way. They were not just unfunny. They were doing things that the Golden Age would never have done. Saddle Sore Galactica from Season 11 is another episode that fans frequently point to. The plot involves the Simpson family adopting a racehorse. That alone is a stretch, but the show had done unlikely premises before and made them work. What pushed this episode into a different category was the subplot involving jockey elves, actual tiny elf creatures who live underground and secretly control horse racing. They threaten Homer, it is played for laughs. But for fans who had grown up with a show that kept its world grounded in some version of reality, no matter how exaggerated, jockey elves living underground felt like a different show entirely. It was not The Simpsons being absurd in the way the Golden Age was absurd. It was The Simpsons being random, and there is a huge difference between absurd and random. Golden Age absurdism was rooted in character and logic. When Homer went to space in Deep Space Homer, it was absurd, but the episode built a logical chain of events that got him there. NASA needed an average American to boost ratings. Homer was the most average American they could find. Every step made sense within the world of the show. Jockey elves did not make sense within any world. They were just weird for the sake of being weird. And that kind of humor does not reward the audience for paying attention. It punishes them. Because the more you think about it, the less sense it makes. And that is the opposite of what Golden Age Simpsons did. The shift in Homer's character was another thing that fans noticed during this period. And this was harder to pinpoint because it happened gradually. There was no single episode where Homer suddenly became a different person. It crept in over time. But by season 10 or 11, a lot of fans had started using a term that would become common in Simpsons discussions online: jerk-ass Homer. The idea behind the term is simple. Golden Age Homer was selfish and dumb, but he had a heart. He loved his family. He would mess up and then find a way to make things at least a little bit right. Jerk-ass Homer was just selfish and dumb. The heart was gone. He would hurt people, physically or emotionally, and the show would play it as a joke, with no consequences and no remorse. In the Golden Age, when Homer did something stupid that hurt someone, the episode dealt with it. There were consequences. Homer had to face what he did. Sometimes he learned a small lesson, sometimes he did not. But the show at least acknowledged that his actions had an impact on the people around him. In the later seasons, Homer could do genuinely cruel things, and the episode would just move on as if nothing happened. He could injure people, destroy property, ruin someone's life, and there would be no emotional fallout. The show stopped holding Homer accountable. And when you stop holding a character accountable for their actions, the audience stops caring about what they do. Because nothing matters, nothing sticks, nothing has weight. The early internet was where a lot of these feelings first found a voice. In the late 90s, before social media existed the way it does now, there were online forums and news groups where Simpsons fans gathered to talk about the show. One of the most active was a Usenet group called alt.tv.simpsons. And as early as 1997 and 1998, people on that forum were having serious discussions about whether the show was declining. These were not casual viewers complaining. These were dedicated fans who had watched every episode multiple times, who could quote scenes from memory, who genuinely loved the show, and who were trying to figure out why it did not feel the same anymore. The discussions on alt.tv.simpsons were remarkably thoughtful. People would compare specific episodes from different seasons. They would analyze joke structures. They would point out moments where a character did something that contradicted their established personality. They would debate whether the show was actually getting worse or whether they were just growing up and their tastes were changing. That last question is one that every fan of a declining show has to wrestle with at some point. Is the thing getting worse, or am I just different now? And with The Simpsons, the answer was both. The audience was getting older, but the show was also getting worse. Those two things can be true at the same time. What made the fan response to the decline so interesting is how universal it was. It was not just one type of viewer noticing. Casual fans felt it. Hardcore fans felt it. Critics felt it. People who worked in comedy felt it. The show's own creators felt it, even if they would not say so publicly. There was a collective awareness that something precious was slipping away, and nobody seemed to be able to stop it. Some fans tried to set exact boundaries. The Golden Age ends after season 8. No, it ends after season 9. No, season 7 was the last truly great season. These debates continue to this day, and they will probably never be fully resolved, because the decline was a gradient, not a cliff. The show did not fall off a ledge, it rolled down a hill. And depending on where you were standing when you first noticed the slope, you drew the line in a different place. But regardless of where individual fans draw that line, almost everyone agrees on the general shape of what happened. The show was extraordinary. Then it was very good. Then it was okay. Then it was mediocre. Then it was bad. Then it just kept going. Season after season after season, getting further and further from the thing it used to be, but never stopping, never ending, never giving the audience the closure of a final episode that said, yes, it is over, and here is how we choose to say goodbye. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that slow, endless continuation changed the way the show felt in a way that went beyond just the quality of individual episodes. Because when the writing declined, it was not just the jokes and the characters that suffered. The world itself started to feel different. Springfield, the town that had felt so alive and so real during the Golden Age, began to lose its shape. The places you knew, the people who lived there, the feeling of a community that existed beyond the edges of the screen, all of that started to fade. And that loss, the loss of Springfield as a place that felt like home, might be the most painful part of the whole decline. Section 8. When Springfield stopped feeling like home. During the Golden Age, Springfield was not just a setting. It was a character. It had a personality. It had a rhythm. It had streets you recognized and buildings you could name, and people who showed up in the same places doing the same things, because that is what people in a real town do. When you watched The Simpsons during those peak years, you felt like you knew Springfield. You knew that Moe's Tavern was where Homer went after work. You knew that the Quickie Mart was where Apu worked 12-hour shifts and sold expired food with a smile. You knew that the First Church of Springfield was where Reverend Lovejoy gave sermons that nobody really listened to. You knew that the Android's Dungeon was where Comic Book Guy judged everyone who walked through the door. These places were not just backdrops painted behind the characters. They were part of the story. Part of the world. Part of what made watching the show feel like visiting somewhere familiar. The town had a geography that made sense, not in a strict, mapped-out way. The show was never obsessed with exact street layouts or distances. But there was an internal logic to how Springfield was organized. The residential neighborhoods felt like residential neighborhoods. The downtown area felt like a downtown area. The industrial section near the power plant felt separate from where the families lived. When Homer drove to work, you had a sense of where he was going. When Bart skateboarded to school, the route felt consistent, even if it was never explicitly drawn on a map. The animators and writers created a town that felt spatially real, even though it was a cartoon. And that sense of place gave the show a grounding that made everything else work better. The crazier the plot got, the more it helped that the world around the characters felt solid and familiar. But more than the buildings and the streets, what made Springfield feel alive was the community. The side characters were not decorations. They had lives. They had routines. They had relationships with each other that existed independently of whatever the Simpson family was doing that week. You would see Hans Moleman getting injured in the background of a scene, and it felt natural because Hans Moleman was always getting injured. That was his thing. You would see Crazy Cat Lady throwing cats at someone, and it was not a random gag. It was just what she did. She lived in Springfield. That was her role in the community. The town was full of these little details that built up over years into something that felt rich and layered and real. In the Golden Age, the show used Springfield's community structure as a source of comedy and storytelling. Town meetings at the Springfield Town Hall were a recurring setup that worked every single time because you knew the people in that room. You knew that Mayor Quimby would say something corrupt. You knew that Helen Lovejoy would cry, "Won't somebody please think of the children?" You knew that Jasper would say something confused and old. You knew that the crowd would swing from one extreme position to another in seconds because that is what the people of Springfield did. They were a mob with a very short attention span. And the joke worked not because mobs are funny in the abstract, but because you knew this specific mob. You had watched them panic and overreact dozens of times before. The comedy was cumulative. It got richer with every episode because every episode added another layer to your understanding of this town and its people. The relationships between side characters also gave Springfield its texture. Lenny and Carl were best friends who worked at the power plant alongside Homer. Their friendship was never the focus of an episode during the Golden Age, but it was always there. Little moments between them, a look, a comment. The suggestion that their lives continued off-screen in ways the show did not need to spell out for you. Smithers' devotion to Mr. Burns was another constant. It was played for comedy, but it was also consistent. Smithers was always there, always loyal, always slightly pathetic in his dedication to a man who barely noticed him. These running threads gave the world continuity. They made it feel like time existed in Springfield, even though the characters never aged. Ned Flanders and Homer's dynamic is a perfect example of how the Golden Age used Springfield's community. Ned was Homer's neighbor. He was everything Homer was not. Kind, generous, devout, patient, responsible, and annoyingly cheerful about all of it. And Homer hated him for it. Not in a violent or cruel way during the Golden Age. In a petty, jealous, very human way. Homer resented Ned because Ned reminded him of everything he was not. And Ned tolerated Homer because that is who Ned was. He turned the other cheek. He kept being nice even when Homer borrowed things and never returned them. Even when Homer insulted him. Even when Homer was the worst neighbor a person could ask for. Their dynamic was funny because it was built on character. You understood why Homer felt the way he did about Ned, and you understood why Ned put up with it. The comedy came from the relationship, not from random conflicts forced onto them by the plot. All of this started to change as the show moved past its golden age, and the change was not sudden, it was gradual. Like a town where businesses start closing one by one, you do not notice it at first. One shop is gone, and you think, well, that is just one shop. Then another closes. Then another. And one day you drive down the main street and realize half the stores are empty and the place does not feel the same anymore. That is what happened to Springfield. The first sign was the side characters losing their depth. Characters who had been written with care and consistency started to become one note. Ned Flanders is probably the most discussed example of this. During the Golden Age, Ned was a genuinely good man with real complexity. He was kind, but not perfect. He struggled with his faith sometimes. He had moments of doubt and frustration. He was a widower after Maud's death, which added real weight to his character. But over time, the show reduced Ned to nothing more than his religion. He became a religious stereotype. Every line he had was about God or the Bible or being offended by something sinful. The warmth was gone. The humanity was gone. He was just the Christian neighbor now, nothing more. Fans have a term for this. They call it Flanderization. And the term has become so widely used that people apply it to characters in other shows who have gone through the same process. It literally comes from what happened to Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. When a character who was once complex gets reduced to one exaggerated trait over time, that is Flanderization. And the fact that the show accidentally created a word for bad character writing by doing it to one of its own characters tells you everything about what went wrong. The same thing happened to other side characters. Mr. Burns went from being a complex villain with moments of vulnerability to just being evil and old. In the Golden Age, there were episodes where you saw Burns as a lonely man. A man who had sacrificed human connection for power and occasionally felt the cost of that choice. In later seasons, He was just a cartoon villain. Ralph Wiggum went from being a sweet, strange kid who said oddly profound things to being a one-dimensional source of random, bizarre lines with no grounding in character. Chief Wiggum went from being a lazy but somewhat functional police chief to being impossibly incompetent in ways that made no sense even for a cartoon. When the characters became flat, the town became flat with them. Because a town is its people. Springfield was not defined by the nuclear power plant, or the gorge, or the mystery of which state it was in. It was defined by Moe and Barney and Apu and Skinner and Krusty and all the others who populated its streets and gave it life. When those characters lost their depth, Springfield lost its soul. It stopped feeling like a place where real people lived and started feeling like a set where cartoon characters performed sketches. The consistency was gone. The internal logic was gone. The sense that this town existed beyond the edges of the screen was gone. The show also started relying more and more on taking the characters out of Springfield entirely. Episodes where the family traveled to other countries became increasingly common. They went to Japan, they went to Brazil, they went to England, they went to Africa. They went to Australia, though that one was actually during the Golden Age and worked because it was grounded in character. But in later seasons, these travel episodes became a crutch. Instead of finding stories within the rich world they had already built, the writers sent the family somewhere new and let the novelty of the location carry the episode. The problem is that novelty wears off fast. A joke about a foreign country is funny once. A joke about a character you love doing something that is true to who they are is funny forever. The use of celebrity guest stars changed in a way that reflected this same loss of identity. During the Golden Age, guest stars played characters who belonged in Springfield. They served the story. In later seasons, celebrities increasingly appeared as themselves. They would show up, the characters would react to their fame, and the episode would revolve around the celebrity rather than the residents of Springfield. This inverted the entire dynamic of the show. Springfield was no longer the center of its own universe. It became a stage for famous people to visit, and every time a celebrity showed up playing themselves, it pulled you out of the world the show had built. It reminded you that this was a TV show, not a town. And that reminder chipped away at the illusion that had made the Golden Age so immersive. The loss of continuity was another factor. During the Golden Age, things that happened in one episode were often acknowledged in later episodes. Not in a strict serialized way, the show was never that, but there were callbacks, references, little nods to the audience that said, yes, we remember too. This character went through this thing, and it mattered. In later seasons, continuity became almost non-existent. Characters would go through massive life changes, and by the next episode, it was as if nothing had happened. Relationships that had been built over years were ignored. History was rewritten or simply forgotten. And when a show stops respecting its own history, the audience stops feeling like that history matters. If the writers do not care about what happened before, why should you? All of these things together, the flattening of characters, the travel episodes, the celebrity appearances, the loss of continuity, they combined to strip Springfield of the thing that had made it special. It was no longer a place you wanted to spend time in. It was no longer a place you knew. The streets were the same, but the soul was different. The buildings were the same, but the people inside them were strangers, wearing the faces of friends you used to know. For the audience that grew up during the Golden Age, this loss was deeply personal. Springfield had been their second hometown, a place they visited every week for years. A place where they knew everyone and everyone's story. Watching it become hollow was like going back to your childhood neighborhood and finding that everything has been repainted, but all the character is gone. The houses are there, but the families you knew have moved away. The park is there, but nobody plays in it anymore. It looks the same on the surface, but it does not feel like home. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And as Springfield lost its identity, The show started making another change that Golden Age fans found hard to stomach. It started bringing in famous faces not to serve the story, but to replace the story. The guest star philosophy shifted completely, and that shift revealed more about what the show had become than almost any other single change. Section 9. Celebrity guests used to serve the story. One of the easiest ways to see the difference between Golden Age Simpsons and everything that came after is to look at how the show used famous people, because the Golden Age had plenty of celebrity guest stars. It was not like the show avoided them. Some of the most beloved episodes in the entire run feature major celebrities in key roles. But the way those celebrities were used tells you everything about what the show valued during those years versus what it started to value once the decline set in. During the Golden Age, the rule was simple, even if nobody ever stated it out loud. The story comes first. The character comes first. The celebrity is there to serve the episode, not the other way around. If a famous person appeared on The Simpsons between seasons 2 and 8, they were almost always playing a character, a fictional person who existed in Springfield and had a role in the plot that could not just be removed without the episode falling apart. The celebrity brought their talent to the role, their voice, their timing, their ability, but they were not there to be themselves. They were there to be someone who belonged in the world of the show. The best example of this might be Dustin Hoffman in Lisa's Substitute from season 2. Hoffman played Mr. Bergstrom, Lisa's substitute teacher, a warm, creative, genuinely caring man who saw Lisa for who she really was and treated her intelligence as something to be celebrated, not something that made her weird. The performance was beautiful. Hoffman brought a warmth and a gentleness to the role that made Mr. Bergstrom feel like a real person. You believed that this man loved teaching. You believed that he connected with Lisa on a level that nobody else in her life had. And when he left at the end of the episode, you felt the loss just as deeply as Lisa did. But here is the thing that tells you everything about how the Golden Age approached celebrity guests. Dustin Hoffman did not use his real name in the credits. He was credited as Sam Ettick, a play on the word Semitic. One of the biggest movie stars in the world appeared on the show and did not even put his name on it, because the performance was what mattered. The character was what mattered, not the celebrity's fame, not the audience going, "Oh, that's Dustin Hoffman." The point was that Mr. Bergstrom felt real. And if the audience found out later that it was Hoffman's voice, that was a nice bonus, but it was never the selling point. Michael Jackson's appearance in Stark Raving Dad from season 3 followed a similar approach. Jackson played Leon Kompowski, a large white man in a mental institution who believed he was Michael Jackson. Homer meets him and brings him home, and the man forms a bond with Bart and helps him write a birthday song for Lisa. Jackson was credited as John J. Smith. Again, one of the most famous people on the planet appeared on the show under a fake name. Because the episode was not about Michael Jackson showing up in Springfield. It was about a man with a delusion, a father who accidentally ends up in a mental hospital, and a brother trying to do something nice for his sister's birthday. The celebrity was invisible. The character was everything. Danny DeVito voiced Herb Powell, Homer's long-lost half-brother in Brother, Can You Spare Two Dimes? And Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? From seasons 2 and 3. Herb was a self-made millionaire who had built a car company from nothing. When he met Homer, his biological brother, he was thrilled. He gave Homer the chance to design a car for the average American. And Homer, being Homer, designed something so ridiculous and so expensive that it bankrupted Herb's entire company. DeVito played Herb with real emotional range. You felt Herb's excitement at finding his family. You felt his horror as Homer destroyed everything he had built. You felt the genuine anger and betrayal when Herb told Homer he had no brother. These were not celebrity moments. They were character moments, performed by a celebrity who understood that his job was to disappear into the role. Even when celebrities played exaggerated versions of real people during the Golden Age, they were still serving the story. The episode Homer at the Bat from Season 3 featured 9 real Major League Baseball players, including Ken Griffey Jr., Wade Boggs, Jose Canseco, Roger Clemens, Don Mattingly, Steve Sachs, Ozzie Smith, Darryl Strawberry, and Mike Scioscia. Each player appeared as themselves, but the episode did not treat them with reverence. They were not there to be cool or impressive. They were there to be funny. Each one suffered some absurd misfortune that prevented them from playing in the big game. Griffey Jr. got a case of gigantism from nerve tonic. Ozzie Smith fell into a dimensional portal at the Springfield mystery spot. Mattingly kept getting benched by Mr. Burns for supposedly not shaving his sideburns, even though he clearly did not have sideburns. The celebrities were props in the comedy. The show used them. They did not use the show. And the episode is remembered as one of the greatest in the show's history, not because of the famous names, but because the writing was brilliant. That is the Golden Age approach. The celebrity serves the story does not serve the celebrity. The audience comes away remembering the character, not the famous person behind the voice. And the show maintains its identity because Springfield remains the center of its own world. Famous people enter that world on the show's terms. They play by Springfield's rules. They become part of the fabric of the town, even if only for one episode. Now let us look at what happened when that approach changed. As the show moved past its golden age and into the later seasons, celebrity guest appearances started to shift in a very noticeable way. Instead of famous people playing fictional characters who served the story, famous people started appearing as themselves. They would show up in Springfield as the actual celebrity, and the characters on the show would react to their fame. The plot of the episode would bend around the guest star. The comedy would center on the idea that a famous person was in town, and the episode would often feel less like a Simpsons story and more like a showcase for whoever was guest starring that week. This might sound like a small change. What difference does it make if a celebrity plays a character or plays themselves? But the difference is enormous. When a celebrity plays a character, the show keeps its integrity. The world of Springfield remains self-contained. The audience stays immersed in the story. When a celebrity plays themselves, the fourth wall cracks. The audience is pulled out of the world of the show and reminded that this is a TV program that can book famous guests. It turns Springfield from a living town into a stage, and stages are not places you feel emotionally connected to. The shift was gradual. It did not happen all at once. Through the late 90s and into the 2000s, more and more episodes featured celebrities appearing as themselves. Musicians, actors, athletes, politicians. They would show up, interact with the Simpson family, and leave. And the episodes built around these appearances were often structured the same way. The family encounters the celebrity, or the celebrity comes to Springfield for some reason. The family is impressed or affected by their presence. Some mild conflict happens. The celebrity helps resolve it or is involved in the resolution. The episode ends. There is no lasting impact on the characters. There is no deeper meaning. There is no reason for the episode to exist beyond the fact that a famous person agreed to be on the show. Compare this to how the Golden Age handled the guest appearance. When Dustin Hoffman played Mr. Bergstrom, the episode fundamentally explored Lisa's need for intellectual validation and her relationship with her father. When Danny DeVito played Herb Powell, the episodes explored family, class, identity, and the gap between Homer's world and the world of success. These episodes used the celebrity's talent to tell stories that mattered to the characters. The guest star was a vehicle for exploring something real about the people who lived in Springfield. In the later seasons, the guest stars became the point. The episode existed because the celebrity was available. And you could feel that. You could feel the writing straining to justify why this famous person was in Springfield. The setups felt forced. The interactions felt unnatural, and worst of all, the regular characters often felt diminished in the presence of the guest star. Homer, Marge, Bart, and Lisa would become supporting players in their own show, standing around reacting to the celebrity instead of driving the story themselves. Lisa Goes Gaga from season 23 is the episode that fans bring up the most when discussing this problem. The episode features Lady Gaga visiting Springfield on a magical train. She senses that Lisa is sad and makes it her mission to cheer Lisa up. The episode includes multiple musical performances and presents Lady Gaga as an almost godlike figure who can solve problems through the power of her celebrity and her music. Lisa, one of the most well-developed characters in television history, is reduced to being sad so that a real-life pop star can fix her. The episode was not just criticized by fans. It was one of the lowest-rated episodes in the show's history at the time it aired. And the criticism was not simply that it was unfunny, although many viewers felt that it was. The criticism was that the episode betrayed what The Simpsons was supposed to be. The show that once had Dustin Hoffman hide his name in the credits because the character mattered more than the fame, was now building entire episodes around celebrating real celebrities. The show that once used famous baseball players as the butt of absurd jokes was now treating pop stars with reverence and awe. The entire philosophy had flipped. The show no longer used celebrities. It was used by them. And this was not just about Lady Gaga. She is the most extreme example, but the pattern was everywhere in the later seasons. Elon Musk appeared as himself. The show treated him favorably. Various musicians, actors, and public figures showed up playing themselves, with the episode structured to accommodate their presence rather than the other way around. Each time it happened, Springfield felt a little less like Springfield and a little more like a talk show set where famous people dropped by for a segment. The saddest part of this shift is what it revealed about the show's confidence in itself. During the Golden Age, The Simpsons did not need celebrities to draw an audience. The writing was the draw. The characters were the draw. The world of Springfield was the draw. People tuned in because they trusted that the show would deliver something brilliant. They did not need the promise of a famous name to get them to watch. The show was bigger than any guest star. It was one of the most famous things in the world. Celebrities wanted to be on The Simpsons, not the other way around. When the show started leaning on celebrity appearances as themselves, it was an admission, whether intentional or not, that the writing alone was no longer enough. The show could not hold an audience on the strength of its own characters and stories anymore. It needed the boost that comes from putting a famous name in the episode description. It needed the press coverage that comes from announcing a big guest star. It needed something external to compensate for what was missing internally. And what was missing internally was everything that had made the show great. The celebrity guest star problem is also connected to a broader issue with how the show started to relate to the culture around it. During the Golden Age, The Simpsons commented on culture. It stood slightly outside of mainstream entertainment and poked fun at it. It was satirical. It had a point of view. It could mock the entertainment industry because it was better than the entertainment industry. It did not need Hollywood's approval because it was already the best thing on television. In the later seasons, the show stopped commenting on culture and started chasing it. Instead of making fun of trends, it tried to be part of them. Instead of satirizing celebrity worship, it participated in it. Instead of standing apart from the mainstream, it became the mainstream in the worst possible way. A show that once told the audience to think for themselves was now telling them to be impressed by the same famous people that every other show was featuring. This loss of identity, this shift from being a show that used celebrity to tell stories to a show that used stories to feature celebrities, is one of the clearest markers of the decline. And it did not just change how individual episodes felt, it changed how the entire show felt. The Simpsons went from being the smartest show in the room to being a show that seemed desperate for approval from the same cultural forces it once mocked. For the fans who grew up during the Golden Age, watching this transformation was confusing and painful. They remembered a show that did not need gimmicks. A show where the most famous guest star in the episode could go uncredited because the work spoke for itself. A show where celebrities were props, not pedestals. And now they were watching that same show roll out the red carpet for whoever was trending that month, building entire episodes around making famous people look good. It felt like watching a brilliant friend who used to make everyone laugh with their original jokes suddenly start repeating other people's material and laughing too loud at their own references. The talent was still in there somewhere, but it was buried under a need to be liked by people who did not matter. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And yet through all of this decline, through all these changes that made the show feel less and less like itself, there was one moment that briefly reminded everyone of what The Simpsons could still be, when it actually tried. One project that brought back just enough of the old magic to make fans believe, even if only for a couple of hours, that the show they loved was not completely gone. And that moment made the return to mediocrity even harder to accept. Section 10. The Simpsons Movie, The Last Flicker of Hope. By 2007, The Simpsons had been on the air for 18 seasons, 18 years of episodes, almost 400 episodes. And for a large portion of the fanbase, the show had not been truly great for nearly a decade. People were still watching out of habit, out of loyalty, out of some stubborn hope that maybe this week's episode would feel like the old days. But that hope was getting thinner every year. The conversations online were no longer about whether the show had declined. That was settled. The conversations were about whether the show should just end. Whether it would be more respectful to the legacy of the Golden Age to let The Simpsons go out with whatever dignity it had left, rather than keep producing episodes that reminded everyone of how far it had fallen. And then the movie came out. The Simpsons movie, released on July 27th, 2007. And for a brief, shining moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the people behind the show still knew how to make something great. The movie had been in development for years. Not the casual kind of development where someone pitches an idea and a studio says, "Sure, let us make it." Real development. The kind where scripts get written and thrown away and rewritten from scratch over and over again because nobody is satisfied. The production of The Simpsons movie reportedly went through over 100 different drafts of the screenplay. James L. Brooks, who had been an executive producer on the show since the beginning, was deeply involved. Al Jean was involved. Matt Groening was involved. Writers who had been part of the show for years contributed. The movie was not a quick cash grab. It was a genuine attempt to make something worthy of the show's legacy, and you could feel the effort in the finished product. From the opening scene, The Simpsons movie felt different from what the weekly show had become. It felt sharper, more confident, more alive. The jokes landed harder. The timing was better. The characters felt more like themselves than they had in years. It was not Golden Age quality. Fans and critics generally agreed on that. It did not reach the heights of seasons 3 through 8, but it was closer to that standard than anything the show had produced in a very long time. And for a fan base that had been starved of quality Simpsons content for years, closer was enough to make them feel something they had almost forgotten. Excitement about The Simpsons. The plot centered on Homer, which was the right call because Homer had always been the heart of the show, even when the show forgot that. Homer adopts a pig from Krusty Burger, a pig that was about to be killed, and he becomes obsessed with it. He fills a silo with the pig's waste and his own garbage, and under pressure from Marge to dispose of it properly, he dumps it in Lake Springfield instead. The pollution is so severe that the EPA, led by a villain named Russ Cargill, voiced by Albert Brooks, convinces the president to seal Springfield under a giant glass dome, trapping the entire town. The Simpson family escapes before the dome closes, but the rest of Springfield is trapped inside. The family flees to Alaska to start a new life, and for a while, it seems like Homer has gotten away with it. He has his family, he has a fresh start, and he does not have to face the consequences of what he did to Springfield. But then the government decides to destroy Springfield entirely, and Marge, who has stood by Homer through decades of his selfishness and stupidity, finally reaches her limit. She takes the kids and leaves Homer behind in Alaska, recording a video message that tells him she is going back to save Springfield with or without him. This is where the movie found its emotional center. Homer, alone in Alaska, has to decide what kind of person he is. Is he the man who runs from his problems and lets other people clean up his mess? Or is he the man who goes back and tries to make things right, even if it means risking everything? And the movie takes its time with this decision. It does not rush Homer to a realization. It lets him sit in his failure. It lets him feel the weight of losing his family. And when he finally decides to go back, when he finally chooses to do the right thing, it feels earned in a way that the weekly show had not been able to achieve in years. The Homer in the Simpsons movie felt like Golden Age Homer. Selfish, yes. Stupid, yes. But capable of love. Capable of growth, even if the growth was small. Capable of making a sacrifice for the people he cared about. When Homer rides a motorcycle up the inside of the dome to throw a bomb through the hole at the top, risking his life to save the town he put in danger, it is a genuinely exciting moment. Not just as an action scene, but as a character moment. Because you have watched Homer fail for the entire movie. You have watched him make the wrong choice over and over again. And now he is finally making the right one. And it matters because the movie put in the work to make you care. The relationship between Homer and Bart was also handled well in the movie. Bart, feeling neglected and unloved by Homer, starts spending time with Ned Flanders. Ned does the things Homer never does. He pays attention to Bart, he spends time with him, he makes Bart feel valued. And there is a scene where Bart genuinely considers Flanders to be more of a father than Homer. This is devastating if you have watched the show for years because you know the history between Homer and Bart. You know that underneath all the strangling and the yelling, there is a real bond. But the movie shows you what happens when that bond is neglected for too long. The kid starts looking for a father somewhere else. And Homer has to earn Bart back, not through a grand gesture, but through showing up, through being present, through finally putting his son ahead of himself. The humor in the movie also felt more like Golden Age Simpsons than anything the show had done in years. The Spider Pig sequence, where Homer holds the pig up to the ceiling and sings, Spider Pig, does whatever a spider pig does, is a perfect example. It is a stupid, silly, childish moment. But it works because it is grounded in Homer's character. Homer is a man who would absolutely become obsessed with a pig. He would absolutely sing a made-up song about it. He would absolutely let his love for this pig cloud his judgment about everything else. The joke is not random. It comes from who Homer is. And that is why it became one of the most quoted moments from the movie. People loved Spider Pig, not because it was a clever joke, but because it felt like Homer. Real Homer. The Homer they missed. The movie also had sharp satirical moments that recalled the Golden Age's ability to comment on the world without being preachy. The environmental storyline, with the EPA sealing Springfield under a dome because of pollution, was ridiculous on the surface but had a real point underneath it about how governments respond to environmental disasters, about how quickly authorities will sacrifice a community when it becomes inconvenient, and about how ordinary people are the ones who pay the price for institutional failure. Arnold Schwarzenegger was portrayed as the President of the United States in the film, a joke that played on his status as Governor of California at the time. He was written as a man who did not read the documents he signed and chose options based on whichever aide pointed to a folder most convincingly. It was political satire done the Simpsons way. Broad enough to be funny to everyone, sharp enough to actually say something. The movie made over $527 million worldwide at the box office. That is an enormous number for an animated film based on a TV show that many people had written off years earlier. The audience showed up because they wanted to believe. They wanted the movie to be good. They wanted to feel what they used to feel when they watched The Simpsons. And for a lot of them, the movie delivered enough of that feeling to be satisfying. Not perfect, not golden age, but enough. Critics were largely positive. The general consensus was that the movie was the best Simpsons content in years. Reviews praised the emotional core, the humor, and the fact that the characters felt more like themselves than they had in a long time. Some critics noted that the movie benefited from having years of development time and multiple rewrites, something the weekly show could never afford. Each regular episode was produced on a tight schedule, with limited time for revision. The movie had the luxury of time, and that time showed in the finished product. But here is where the story of the Simpsons movie becomes painful. Because the movie did not save the show. It was not the beginning of a renaissance. It was not the moment where the people behind The Simpsons said, "Okay, we remember how to do this now. Let us bring this energy back to the weekly episodes." Instead, it was an isolated event. A brief flash of quality surrounded by years of mediocrity on both sides. When the show returned to its regular season after the movie, nothing had changed. The weekly episodes were the same as they had been before the film, the same flat characters, the same reliance on celebrity guests playing themselves, the same lack of emotional weight, the same feeling of a show going through the motions. Whatever effort and care and attention to detail had gone into the movie did not transfer back to the series. And for the fans who had let themselves hope, this was devastating. It was like watching someone you care about get sober for a week. You see glimpses of who they used to be. You remember why you love them. You think maybe this time it is going to last. And then they go right back to the same patterns that had been breaking your heart for years. The movie proved that The Simpsons could still be good. It proved that the characters could still work, that Homer could still make you laugh and make you feel something, that the show's world still had potential. And that proof made the return to mediocrity worse, not better, because now you knew it was a choice. The people behind the show could make something great when they put in the effort. They just were not putting in the effort on the weekly show. And that felt like a betrayal of the audience that had stuck around through years of declining quality, still watching, still hoping, still giving the show their time and attention week after week. The Simpsons movie also highlighted something else about the decline. The movie worked in part because it had a clear emotional arc. Homer messes up, Homer loses his family, Homer has to earn them back. That is a simple story, but it is a powerful one because it connects to the core of what The Simpsons is about. A flawed family that stays together because they love each other, even when that love is messy and complicated and sometimes hard to see. The weekly episodes had lost that emotional through line. They had become disconnected stories that did not build to anything and did not ask the audience to feel anything. The movie reminded everyone that the show's greatest strength was never the jokes, it was the family, and the weekly show had forgotten its own family. For a lot of fans, The Simpsons movie was the last time they felt truly optimistic about the show. It was the last time they let themselves believe that a turnaround was possible. After the movie came and went, and the weekly show remained unchanged, a kind of acceptance settled over the fan base. The golden age was not coming back. The movie had been a beautiful exception, not a new beginning. And the show is going to keep going, regardless of how the audience felt about it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That acceptance led to a new question, one that fans had been dancing around for years but could no longer avoid. If the show was never going to be great again, if the golden age was truly over and everyone involved seemed to know it, then why was The Simpsons still on the air? Why did it keep going season after season, year after year, long past the point where anyone was arguing it was essential television? Why did nobody pull the plug? And the answer to that question has nothing to do with art or storytelling or characters or legacy. It has to do with money. And that answer might be the most depressing part of this entire story. Section 11. Why they never pulled the plug. There is a question that every Simpsons fan has asked at some point. Some asked it in season 15. Some asked it in season 20. Some did not ask it until season 30. But eventually, everyone who cared about this show arrived at the same thought. Why is this still going? Why has nobody ended it? Why is a show that everyone agrees peaked over 20 years ago still producing new episodes every single year with no end in sight? It is a fair question. Most great television shows end. They reach a point where the creators feel they have told the stories they wanted to tell, and they choose to stop. Breaking Bad ended after 5 seasons because Vince Gilligan felt the story of Walter White was complete. The show was still hugely popular. It could have continued, but Gilligan understood that a great ending is worth more than a few more seasons of content. The Wire ended after 5 seasons. The Sopranos ended after 6. Seinfeld ended after 9, and even that was considered a long run. These shows understood that endings matter, that knowing when to stop is part of the art. The Simpsons has never stopped. As of now, the show has produced over 770 episodes across more than 35 seasons. It is the longest-running American animated program in history. The longest-running American sitcom in history. It has been on the air for more than 3 decades. Children who were born after the Golden Age ended have grown up, graduated college, started careers, and had children of their own, all while The Simpsons continued to air new episodes that almost nobody talks about the way they talk about the classics. So why? Why does the show continue? The answer is not complicated. It is just depressing. The Simpsons continues because it makes money. A lot of money. More money than most people can comprehend. And as long as it keeps making money, nobody with the power to end it has any reason to do so. The economics of The Simpsons are staggering. The show generates revenue from multiple streams. There are the advertising dollars from new episodes that air on Fox. There is the merchandise, which has generated billions of dollars over the life of the show. T-shirts, toys, video games, theme park attractions, food products, home goods. Homer Simpson's face has been printed on more products than most people could list in an hour. There are the syndication deals, which is where television shows make enormous amounts of money by selling the rights to rerun old episodes on other channels and platforms. The Simpsons syndication deals have been worth billions over the years. Every time you see a rerun of The Simpsons on cable television or on a streaming platform, money is being generated. And then there is the streaming era. When Disney acquired 21st Century Fox in 2019, they acquired The Simpsons along with it. The entire library of the show became a cornerstone of the Disney Plus streaming service. Every single episode, from the very first to the most recent, is available on the platform. And The Simpsons is consistently one of the most watched shows on Disney Plus. Not because people are tuning in for the new episodes. Most of the streaming viewership comes from people re-watching the classic seasons. People fall asleep to Golden Age Simpsons. They put it on in the background while they cook or clean. They re-watch their favorite episodes for the 100th time. The old episodes are comfort content for millions of people around the world. And that viewership is incredibly valuable to Disney. This creates a situation that is almost absurd when you think about it. The old episodes are what people want to watch. The new episodes are what keep the show technically alive and in the conversation. And the combination of old content generating streaming numbers and new content generating advertising revenue and cultural relevance creates a financial engine that nobody wants to turn off. Even if every single person involved in making the show agreed that it should end, the corporate math would argue against it. The Simpsons as a continuing property is worth more than The Simpsons as a finished one. A show that is still on the air is a show that can still sell new merchandise, attract new sponsorship deals, and generate headlines. A show that is ended is a library. Still valuable, but less so. The voice actors are part of this equation too. The main cast of The Simpsons, the people who voice Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and dozens of other characters, have gone through multiple contract negotiations over the life of the show. These negotiations have occasionally been contentious and very public. The cast reportedly earns several $100,000 per episode. At various points in the show's history, there have been reports of the actors earning around $300,000 per episode each, though the exact figures have changed with different contract renegotiations over the years. When you are earning that kind of money for voice work on a show that requires a fraction of the time commitment of a live-action series, walking away is a very difficult decision. The financial incentive to keep going is enormous for everyone involved. Al Jean has been the showrunner since season 13. That means he has been running the show for over 20 seasons, more than twice as long as the entire Golden Age lasted. And Jean is not a bad showrunner. He was part of the original team. He cares about the show. He has spoken in interviews about his love for these characters and his desire to maintain quality. But the reality of producing over 20 episodes a year for more than 2 decades takes a toll on any creative enterprise. The well runs dry. The stories become harder to find. The characters have been in so many situations that finding new ones that feel fresh becomes almost impossible. And yet, the machine keeps running, because the machine is designed to keep running. The show is not driven by a creative vision that has a beginning, middle, and end. It is driven by a production schedule that requires new episodes every year because the business model depends on it. This is fundamentally different from how the Golden Age operated. During the Golden Age, the show felt like it was being made by people who had something to say. Each episode existed because someone in the writer's room had an idea they were passionate about, a story they wanted to tell, a joke they could not get out of their head. The creative impulse came first, and the business followed. In the later years, that relationship inverted. The business comes first. There will be a new season. There will be 20-something episodes. The writers need to fill those episodes with something, and so they do. Not because they are burning with ideas, but because the schedule demands content. That is a factory, not an art form, and the audience can taste the difference. Other shows have faced the same crossroads and made different choices. The Office ended after 9 seasons. It could have continued. The show was still popular and still profitable. But the creative team decided that the story had been told. The characters had reached their endpoints. Continuing would mean diminishing what they had built. So they ended it with a finale that gave the audience closure and let the characters rest. It was a respectful choice, a choice that honored the audience and the work. The Simpsons has never made that choice. And with every passing year, the gap between what the show is and what the show was grows wider. New viewers who start watching the latest season and then go back to discover the Golden Age are often shocked by the difference. It is hard to believe it is the same show. The writing, the characters, the humor, the emotional depth, everything about the Golden Age feels like it comes from a completely different program. And in a way, it does. The only things connecting Season 4 to Season 34 are the character designs and the voice actors. Everything else has changed. There is something particularly cruel about a show that will not end when it should. Because as long as The Simpsons keeps going, the conversation around it will always be tinged with sadness. People cannot simply celebrate the Golden Age and move on. Every new season is a reminder of what the show has become. Every mediocre episode is a shadow cast over the brilliant ones that came before. If the show had ended after Season 8 or Season 10 or even Season 12, the legacy would be cleaner. People would talk about The Simpsons the way they talk about other great shows that ended well, with pure admiration, with uncomplicated love. Instead, the legacy is complicated. It is messy. It is a story of brilliance followed by decades of decline that is still ongoing. And that decline colors how people feel about the whole thing. The comparison that fans often make is to a beloved family member who has changed. The person you knew is still in there somewhere, but they are buried under years of choices that have obscured who they used to be. And you cannot separate your love for who they were from your sadness about who they have become. Every time you see them, you feel both things at the same time. That is what watching The Simpsons feels like now for people who were there during the Golden Age. Love and grief existing in the same space. Because the show is still alive. It is right there. You can turn on your TV and watch a new episode anytime you want. But the thing you loved about it is gone. And it has been gone for a very long time. The show has also outlasted its own cultural moment. The Simpsons was born in an era of appointment television, family viewing, and monoculture. It thrived because everyone was watching the same thing at the same time. That world does not exist anymore. Television is fragmented across dozens of streaming platforms. Families do not gather around the TV at the same time the way they used to. The cultural conditions that allowed The Simpsons to become what it became in the early 90s are gone. And yet the show continues. A relic of an era that has passed, still producing content for an audience that has largely moved on. For some fans, there is anger about this. They feel that the show's legacy is being actively damaged by its refusal to end. That every new mediocre season makes it harder to appreciate the Golden Age on its own terms. That the sheer volume of bad episodes now vastly outnumbers the good ones, and that this imbalance will eventually define the show in the eyes of future generations who did not grow up with it. For other fans, there is just sadness. A quiet, tired sadness that comes from watching something you love refuse to let go. They do not hate the new episodes, they just do not care about them. They stopped watching years ago. They go back and rewatch seasons 3 through 8 when they want comfort. They quote the old lines. They share the old clips. And they try not to think too much about the fact that somewhere, right now, a new episode of The Simpsons is being written that will air and be forgotten within a week. The refusal to end The Simpsons is not just a business decision. It is the final chapter in the story of the show's decline, because a great ending could have redeemed so much. A thoughtful, emotional, carefully crafted final episode could have reminded the world of what this show was capable of. It could have given the characters the send-off they deserved. It could have given the audience closure. Instead, the show just keeps going, and the longer it goes, the further it drifts from the thing that made it matter in the first place. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that brings us to the real question, the one that sits underneath all of this. Underneath the analysis of the writing and the characters and the guest stars and the business decisions, the question of what we are actually mourning when we say we miss The Simpsons. Because it is not just a television show. It was never just a television show. And what it really represents, what its golden age really meant to the people who lived through it, is something much bigger and much more personal than any single episode or any single joke. Section 12. What we are really mourning. When someone says they miss The Simpsons, pay attention to how they say it. They do not say it the way you say you miss a show that got canceled too soon. They do not say it the way you say you miss a movie you have not watched in a while. They say it the way you say you miss a person. There is weight in it. There is something underneath the words that goes deeper than entertainment. Because The Simpsons is not something people consumed. It is something people lived with. It was in their homes every week for years. It was in their conversations every day. It was in their heads, shaping how they thought and how they laughed and how they understood the world around them. And when something lives with you that long and that deeply, Losing it does not feel like losing a show. It feels like losing a part of yourself. That is what this whole video has really been about. Not the writing staff, not the showrunners, not the network decisions or the celebrity guest stars or the business model that keeps the show on life support. Those are the mechanics of the decline. They explain how it happened, but they do not explain why it hurts. And it does hurt. For millions of people who grew up during the Golden Age, the decline of The Simpsons is not an academic discussion about television quality. It is a wound. A small one, maybe. Not the kind that changes your life, but a real one. The kind that aches when you are not expecting it. When you hear the saxophone from the opening theme in a grocery store. When someone quotes Homer, and for a second you are 12 years old again sitting on that couch. When you scroll past a clip from And Maggie Makes Three, and you feel something tighten in your chest because you remember what it was like to watch that scene for the first time. The reason it hurts is because The Simpsons is tangled up with time, with a specific period in people's lives that they cannot go back to. The golden age of The Simpsons lines up almost perfectly with the childhood and teenage years of an entire generation. The people who were kids in the early 90s, who were teenagers in the mid-90s, who were young adults by the time the decline set in. For that generation, The Simpsons is not separate from their memories of growing up. It is woven into them. The show was on in the background of their childhood. It was playing during family dinners and sick days and sleepovers and lazy Sunday afternoons. It was the thing they talked about with friends at school. It was the first show that made them feel like they were in on the joke. Like they understood something about the adult world that they were not supposed to understand yet. When people rewatch Golden Age episodes now, they are not just rewatching a TV show. They are reopening a door to a time in their lives when things were simpler. When their biggest worry was a homework assignment, not a mortgage payment. When their family was all in one house, not scattered across different cities. When the future was something exciting and far away, not something that arrived too fast and turned out to be more complicated than anyone promised. The golden age of The Simpsons is a time machine, and every episode is a ticket back to a version of your life that does not exist anymore. This is why the show is one of the most rewatched pieces of content on streaming platforms. People are not rewatching because they forgot what happens in the episode. They have seen Cape Fear 50 times. They know every line. They know every joke. They know that Sideshow Bob is going to step on the rakes. They are rewatching because the act of watching makes them feel something that nothing new can replicate. It is comfort. It is nostalgia. It is the emotional equivalent of going home, except the home they are going back to only exists inside these episodes. There is a reason why so many people specifically say they fall asleep to The Simpsons. It is one of the most common things you hear from fans of the Golden Age. They put on old episodes at night and let the familiar voices carry them to sleep. Think about what that means. These people have heard these episodes so many times that the dialogue has become a kind of lullaby. The voices of Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa are comfort sounds. They are as familiar and as soothing as a parent's voice reading a bedtime story. That is not a normal relationship between an audience and a television show. That is something deeper, something that borders on family. And this is the cruelest part of the decline. The show is still there. It is still making new episodes. You can still hear those voices every week if you want. But it is not the same. The voices are the same, but the words are different. The characters look the same, but they do not act the same. The town is the same, but it does not feel the same. It is like calling a phone number that used to connect you to someone you loved and hearing a stranger pick up. The line is still active, but the person on the other end is gone. The decline of The Simpsons also mirrors something bigger that happened to the culture around it. The show rose during the last era of shared television. The last era when a single show could be watched by 30 million people in the same time slot on the same night. That era is gone. Streaming has fragmented the audience into millions of tiny pieces. People do not watch the same things at the same time anymore. There is no water cooler show that the entire country talks about the next morning. The experience of sitting in a living room with your family, watching the same program at the same time, and then going to school or work and discovering that everyone else watched it too, that experience barely exists anymore. And The Simpsons was one of the last great examples of it. So when people mourn The Simpsons, they are also mourning that experience, the togetherness of it, the shared language it created, the way it connected strangers and friends and family members through a common reference point. When you quoted Homer at school and 3 different kids laughed because they saw the same episode last night, that was a form of community. A small one, but a real one. And that kind of community is harder to find now. Entertainment is personalized. Everyone is watching something different on their own screen at their own time. The idea that a cartoon could unite an entire generation feels almost impossible in today's media landscape. But it happened. The Simpsons did it. And that makes its decline feel like the loss of something that cannot be rebuilt. There is also something about sincerity that the Golden Age had that the modern world has moved away from. The best episodes of The Simpsons were sincere, not sentimental, not manipulative, sincere. They genuinely believed in the emotional moments they created. When Homer looked at those photos of Maggie and the sign read, "Do it for her," the show was not being ironic. It was not winking at the audience. It was telling you something true about what it means to sacrifice for someone you love. When Lisa cried because her substitute teacher left, the show was not performing sadness for effect. It was showing you what it feels like to lose someone who saw the real you. These moments worked because the people who made them believed in them. They were not afraid to be earnest. Modern entertainment is often afraid of sincerity. Everything is layered with irony. Everything has a wink. Everything is self-aware to the point where genuine emotion feels risky. The later seasons of The Simpsons fell into this trap too. Emotional moments started to feel calculated rather than earned. The show became self-referential. It started making jokes about its own decline. It acknowledged that it was not as good as it used to be, as if acknowledging the problem was the same as fixing it. But self-awareness without change is just performance. It is a show saying, we know we are not great anymore, but we are going to keep doing it anyway. And for fans who remembered when the show did not need to be self-aware because it was too busy being brilliant, that kind of meta-humor was not funny. It was sad. The Simpsons Golden Age represents something that people are deeply hungry for and rarely find anymore. A piece of entertainment that is smart without being pretentious, funny without being cruel, emotional without being manipulative, simple enough for a child and layered enough for an adult, made with care and passion by people who loved what they were doing and were not thinking about algorithms or engagement metrics or brand synergy. It was art made by human beings for other human beings. And you could feel the humanity in every frame. That is what we are really mourning. Not just the show, not just the jokes, not just the characters. We are mourning a time when something like The Simpsons was possible. A time when a group of writers could sit in a room and create something so good and so honest that it became part of the emotional fabric of an entire generation. A time when television could be a family ritual instead of a solo activity. A time when a cartoon about a yellow family in a fictional town could teach you about love, failure, loneliness, ambition, and the messy beauty of being alive. We are mourning the fact that we were young enough to receive all of that without questioning it, without analyzing it, without needing to write a video essay about why it mattered. We just watched. We just laughed. We just felt. And it became part of who we are. The communities that exist online around classic Simpsons are proof of how deep this goes. The subreddit dedicated to The Simpsons is dominated by content from the Golden Age. People post screenshots from episodes that aired 25 or 30 years ago. They make memes from scenes that everyone has seen 100 times. They quote lines back and forth to each other like a call and response at a church service. It is a community built entirely on shared memory, on the collective experience of having loved the same thing at the same time. And the fact that these communities are still active, still growing, still passionate about episodes that aired before some of their members were born tells you everything about what The Simpsons meant. It was not content. It was culture. It was identity. It was home. And that home is what people are trying to get back to every time they put on an old episode. Every time they hear that saxophone, every time they see Homer on that couch and feel something warm and familiar and just a little bit sad. They are not trying to watch a TV show. They are trying to go back. Back to that living room. Back to that couch. Back to that feeling of everything being okay for 30 minutes because the funniest, smartest, most heartfelt show in the world was on, and you were exactly where you were supposed to be. The Simpsons gave that to us, and then it took it away. Not by ending, that might have been easier, but by continuing. By showing us the same characters in the same town telling stories that no longer carried the same weight. By proving that the thing we loved could become something we barely recognized while still wearing the same face. We do not miss The Simpsons because it was a great show. We miss it because it was our show, and nothing has replaced it. And maybe nothing ever will. So if you are watching this video late at night, and you have an old episode of The Simpsons queued up to fall asleep to after this is over, I understand. I really do. You are not just watching television. You are going home. And I hope, even for just those 22 minutes, it feels exactly the way you remember. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. I have another deep dive coming soon that I think you are going to love. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.